In this video, we're going to talk about solving absolute value equations. So the first thing we need to think about is we need to recall what absolute values actually tell us. So we need to remember that they tell us the distance from 0 on a number line. So the distance from 0 on a number line. So that means if we have something like the absolute value of x equals 5, that tells us that there's some number that we're going to call x that's 5 spots away from 0 on the number line. So if you think about it, there's actually two numbers that are going to satisfy that condition. Obviously 5 is 5 away from 0 on the number line, but negative 5 is also 5 away from 0 on the number line. So both negative 5 and 5 are going to satisfy this idea that we want to be 5 away from 0 on the number line. Now, we're going to use that idea to solve absolute value equations. So before, when we had absolute value of x equals 5, we said both x equals 5 and x equals negative 5. So the thing that we had on the inside of our absolute value was both positive and negative. So if we have something like ax plus b equals c, then we know that, well, ax plus b has to equal c, but we also know, oops, we have that in another spot, so let's get rid of this real quick. We know that both ax plus b and the opposite of ax plus b have to equal c. So this ax plus b takes the spot of 5. So 5 was 5 spots away. Negative 5 was 5 spots away, and this is just how many spots we are away. So that's how we're going to go about solving absolute value equations. We're going to take the subject of our absolute value, so the thing inside the absolute value, and that has to equal whatever we set the equation equal to, and the opposite of our subject, so in this case negative ax plus b, has to also equal that same c. Now there's two notes that we have to keep in our mind when we're doing this. Setting these things equal to c only works if the absolute value has been isolated. So if there's anything else with the absolute value on the left-hand side of the equation, we have to move it over to the right-hand side before we do anything. This only works if this is satisfied here. Absolute value of ax plus b equals c. The other thing we have to keep in mind is absolute values cannot equal a negative number. And that's because they're going to represent the distance from 0, and we can't measure distance with negative numbers. So since we're talking about the distance from 0, we can only have a positive number. So if we've isolated our absolute value and it's set equal to a negative number, we don't have to do any more work. We're just going to go ahead and say that there's no solution. So if you had something like the absolute value of 3x plus 4 equals negative 2, we're going to stop, because there's nothing that's going to say 3x plus 4 is negative 2 away from 0 on a number line, because we don't know. We can't ever be negative 2 away from 0. Now remember, this is only going to work if we have already isolated our absolute value. So let's look at an example real quick. Solve 2 times the absolute value of x minus 1 minus 5 equals 0. So that first thing we want to keep in mind is we have to isolate our absolute value first. So if we look, we have this negative 5 and we have this 2 with our absolute value, so we can't really do anything yet. So we got to isolate that absolute value. So let's start by adding 5 to each side. So 2 times the absolute value of x minus 1 is going to equal 6. The absolute value is still not isolated because we have that 2. So we have to divide each side by 2. So those are going to divide out. So absolute value of x minus 1, 6 divided by 2 is 3. Now we've isolated our absolute value. There's nothing left with it on the left-hand side. So now we need to think about what we just said a minute ago. The subject of our absolute value has to equal the right-hand side. In this case, our c is 3. So x minus 1, whoops, not c, but 3. So x minus 1 equals 3. Then we also said that the opposite of the subject, so the opposite of x minus 1, has to also equal 3. And now we have two very easy one variable equations to solve. So we add 1, so x is equal to 4. Then we can distribute the negative 1, so negative x plus 1 equals 3. Subtract 1, negative x equals 2. Divide by negative 1, x equals negative 2. So we're going to get two answers, x equals 4 or x equals negative 2. And if you wanted to check your answers, you can plug them into the beginning. 4 minus 1 is 3. Absolute value of 3 is 3 times 2 is 6, minus 5 is 1. So this one would work. And negative 2 minus 1 is negative 3. Absolute value of negative 3 is 3 times 2 is 6, minus 5 is 1. So this one's going to work as well. So the big things that we need to make sure we keep in mind is isolate your absolute value. Once you've isolated your absolute value, the subject of your absolute value equals the number, and the opposite of your subject equals that number, and then you just solve from there. So your homework is going to be to answer the try these problems at the bottom of page 11 in your book. I believe there are 4 of them. So that's going to do it for this video.